So, we've talked a lot about how geography can shape an economy, but what happens when a real catastrophe hits? In this final part of our series, we're going to dive into economic resilience. We'll be looking at the deep and often pretty surprising connection between a country's physical landscape and the institutions that guide its recovery and its growth.
Here's our game plan. We're going to start with a fascinating historical puzzle that shows just how persistent economic geography can be. Then, we'll unpack the big debate. Is it geography or institutions that really drives prosperity? From there, we'll see how these two forces actually work together. And finally, we'll connect all this to the challenge of creating fairer, more inclusive economies today.
Okay, let's begin with a really compelling historical event. It's what economists call a natural experiment. Basically, a situation that let them witness the raw, enduring power of geography in a way that's almost never possible.
This really gets to a fundamental question in development economics. And to explore it, we're going to look at the aftermath of one of the 20th century's most destructive events, which unintentionally created a perfect case study.
Think about it. After World War II, many of Japan's major cities were almost completely wiped out, creating what you'd think would be a blank slate. Well, economists Donald Davis and David Weinstein studied what happened next, and their findings were remarkable. The country's fundamental economic geography just reasserted itself. Cities that were centers for specific industries before the war became centers for those exact same industries once again.
The evidence was pretty undeniable. Underlying geographical advantages, like a natural harbor or a key spot on a trade route, are incredibly persistent. These locational fundamentals proved so powerful that they guided the entire economic reconstruction, drawing people and capital right back to the same historically advantageous places, even after they'd been reduced to rubble.
This finding leads us directly into one of the biggest debates in economics. What is the ultimate driver of prosperity? Is it a country's physical geography, or is it the human-made rules that govern its society?
So you've got these two main schools of thought. The geography-centric view argues that physical things, like mountains or coastlines, set the fundamental opportunities for an economy. On the other hand, the institution-centric view says geography is secondary. What really matters are the rules of the game, the laws and norms that shape incentives for people to invest and innovate.
So we're all on the same page. Let's just quickly define institutions. We'll use the definition from Nobel laureate Douglass North. He described them as the formal rules, like laws and constitutions, and also the informal constraints, like social norms. And together, all these rules, formal and informal, create the entire incentive structure of an economy. The work of Acemoglu, Johnson, and Robinson offers a really powerful case for institutions. They studied the colonial period and found a stark pattern. Where the disease environment was safe for European settlers, they established inclusive institutions that protected property rights. But where diseases like malaria were rampant, they created extractive institutions designed simply to pull resources out. The astonishing finding is that these institutional choices, which were dictated by disease risks centuries ago, are incredibly strong predictors of a country's wealth today.
So, framing this as a geography versus institutions battle kind of misses the real story. The most insightful research shows it's not a binary choice at all. It's about how these two powerful forces interact.
The reality is that this was never a zero-sum game. Geography doesn't just act on an economy directly. It profoundly influences the type of institutions that develop in the first place, setting in motion a long-term developmental path.
Here's a more nuanced way to think about it. It starts with geography, climate, soil, disease. These conditions then shape how historical events like colonialism unfold. That, in turn, influences whether a society develops extractive or inclusive institutions. And those institutions ultimately set the country's long-term economic path.
The economic history of the Americas is a perfect case study. Engerman and Sokoloff found that geography suitable for growing cash crops like sugar and cotton on large plantations, which relied on slave labor, led to the development of highly unequal extractive societies. In contrast, geographies in North America suitable for grain and mixed farming on smaller family-owned plots fostered the growth of more inclusive, egalitarian institutions. And these different paths set by geography have had lasting effects on inequality and development.
And it isn't just about colonialism. Jeffrey Herbst's work on Africa shows how the continent's geography, low population density across vast, difficult terrain, made it incredibly costly for rulers to build strong, centralized states like those you saw in Europe. This institutional weakness, rooted in geography, has had lasting consequences for governance and development.
So,
How do we apply this historical debate to today's biggest policy challenge, creating economic growth that actually benefits everyone?
Inclusive growth is a concept that moves beyond just looking at headline GDP figures. It asks the critical questions about who benefits from economic growth. The goal is to create a system where prosperity is shared and opportunities are available to everyone, addressing those deep-seated inequalities.
This table shows how this all translates into policy. The key is diagnosis. If the main barrier is geographical isolation, the solution might be strategic infrastructure, like that railway giving Ethiopia access to the sea. But if the core problem is a weak institutional framework and corruption, the focus has to be on governance reform. For regional disparities, maybe the answer is targeted development. The point is, the policy has to match the problem.
Ultimately, there are no simple, one-size-fits-all solutions. A huge infrastructure project is going to fail if corrupt institutions get in the way. At the same time, institutional reform won't help much if a region remains geographically cut off from markets. Effective policy has to be tailored to the context, addressing the deep, intertwined roots of the problem.
This leaves us with the critical question for policymakers today. With limited resources, where do you start? Do you invest in a massive project to overcome a geographical barrier, or do you begin a long, difficult process of institutional reform? We've seen that you really need both, but deciding which one comes first, that question of priority and sequencing, remains one of the toughest challenges in economics.